Well, the first thing you want to do is reverse your thinking. You're not trying to build a yield, you're trying to preserve it. You start with high potential, and then environment, conditions, management mistakes, it bleeds off. And so you start out with the perception of how do I keep the yield from falling, not how do I build a bigger one. And you know, we try to reduce everything to a formula. Wheat yield's based up on how many kernels you produce per acre and what do they weigh. And so if your yield's down, you either lost kernel weight or you lost kernel numbers. Which one did you lose? And which one of those took your last 10 bushels? And so we always try to get the last 10 bushels back because that's the easiest one to find and the easiest one to fix. Not necessarily. The problem you get into is when you start crowding plants, they react negative. And you can have a thinner stand and excellent tillering and get a good yield. You can have a thicker stand and less tillering and get a good yield. It kind of depends on what you're up against. If you're planting early, we tend to go a little lighter on the seeding rate and lean a little more on the tillering. Now that's dependent on how well we feed it on the front end. But if we're planting later, then we tend to both feed it a little more aggressively and plant a higher rate, because it's really going to come down to how many heads we have next spring. That's the one factor we seem to be able to influence the most. The number of grains per head, we struggle with, did we actually change that? But the number of heads we produce per acre, we do seem to be able to impact that. And right now it looks like it's a combination of early nutrition and seeding rate. You just have to be careful that when you seed higher rates, you introduce crowding. And when you introduce crowding, then the early nutrition becomes even more important. Seed treatment has great value. It's a soil and an environmental thing. If you've got better drained soils, less prone to staying saturated, that kind of thing, or if you're in a drier environment, you tend to have less problems with seedling blights and those kinds of issues. But it's a tool that you use. And you know, if your survivability is down and you add a seed treatment, that changes it. And good seed wheat's expensive. And if you can get the same stand by applying a lower cost treatment as opposed to buying more expensive seed wheat, then I think that's a game you play. There's a lot of things I like about no-till. One of them is if we don't work it in the fall, we generally have better moisture to get a stand established. And a lot of times that's our biggest struggle. We just can't get enough seeds to germinate and grow. Recognize when you're no-tilling that the ground's probably going to be colder. And cold ground does not feed a crop as effectively as warm ground. So your early fertility becomes a little more important in no-till. It's a little more forgiving in conventional systems. But in a given area, to say one's better than another, it depends on what dragon you're trying to slay. If your biggest problem is you're not having enough moisture to get the stand established, I would lean towards no-till.